This presentation is meant for the students of semester 3 on general English. This is MD.JALEEL, Assistant Professor of English, Department of English, Tara Government College Autonomous, Sangareddy. In our today's presentation, we take on unit number 3. In our previous presentations, we have completed the first 2 units of the syllabus of semester 3. So in today's presentation, we begin presenting unit number 3. Like our previous 2 units, unit number 3 also has been divided into 4 sections. The first section is a poem, which today we are going to begin. And second one is a prose piece of writing. Third one is vocabulary. And fourth one is grammar. So in our today's presentation, we begin the first section of unit 3, which is a poem. So in our syllabus, we have a poem in unit number 3 titled As I Grew Older. So in our today's presentation, in this presentation, we take the first part of the presentation. So the name of the poem is As I Grew Older, and this poem is written by a familiar Afro-American poet, a famous African-American writer, Langston Hughes. So before entering into the poem, first we begin our presentation with the first activity that has been prescribed in our syllabus. The first section of this poem that is in our syllabus is pre-reading activity. So before reading the poem, before entering into the actual poem, we will have this activity. In this activity, there will be some questions. So we try to discuss these questions so that these questions lead us to understand the poem in a better way. And these questions motivate us towards the poem. So first we try to take the first question. Do you know what the word discrimination means? You know the word. Have you heard the word, this word, discrimination? Do you know the meaning of this word, discrimination? What can be called as a discrimination? I try to give you the meaning of the word discrimination. Discrimination is a kind of behavior, attitude, distinguish, separating, oppressing people from one another. So discrimination makes people to suppress or to separate or to hate or to humiliate on one ground. So in a society where absolute equality among the people is not possible, we can observe discrimination. So discrimination takes place in many angles, many spheres. So the word discrimination talks about the inequalities, the domination and the oppression among groups or people. So that is the meaning of the word discrimination. So now if you understand the meaning of the word discrimination, the second question is that, have you ever felt discriminated against? If yes, what was the reason for it? If not, have you witnessed any instance of discrimination? So if you know the idea, the concept of discrimination, the next question is just think, have you ever felt discriminated against? In your life experience, personally, on your own, have you ever felt discriminated? Any people or any group or any person did discriminate you? Means, have you felt separated, humiliated, insulted, or suppressed, oppressed? Have you ever felt this kind of feeling? If yes, if you think yes, sometimes you were discriminated, what was the reason for it? On which ground? On what basis you were discriminated? Just try to recall the experience. Just try to remember the experience. If you were discriminated at any point of time in your life. If not, if you were not discriminated at any time on any grounds, you felt absolute equality in your life experiences, have you witnessed, have you gone through, have you seen, have you observed any instance? Just remember any instance. Instance means example of discrimination. If you did not face any kind of discrimination, did you see any other person, any other instance, any other example that gone under through discrimination? Just remember. So if you remember your real life experience, you will be more connected to the word of discrimination and as well as the present word. So just remember, have you ever felt a discrimination? Or if not, have you witnessed any kind of such situations, instances, examples in your life? The next question is, what could be the various grounds for discrimination? Okay, if there you witnessed or you observed, you've gone through the things of discrimination. If you never felt any kind of discrimination, that is very well, that is fine and good. You have been living a very excellent way of life. But if you feel that the discrimination is there, it is present there, then what do you think, what are the different grounds and different areas generally we face discrimination? Generally, we can observe discrimination on the basis of gender. So there are inequalities between men and women because we are living in a male-dominated society. So naturally, the values of a society support men and they discriminate women from the equality with men. So that is one of the grounds. And in our Indian society, sometimes people face discrimination on the basis of caste. And sometimes people face discrimination on the basis of religion, region, sometimes language, sometimes minority people, culturally. So there will be a lot of discriminations may be present in our society. So there will be a lot of grounds may be there for the base of discrimination. If you understand these things, if you think about these things on discrimination, the next question is, do you know what racism is? Have you heard this word racism? I think many of you know the meaning of race. Race is generally tells about a particular kind of people living in a particular area, place, or country, race. But racism is something related to uh, a kind of situation where different races live together in one society. Then racism takes place. So racism is nothing but it is a kind of prejudice, a kind of ego, or sometimes racism is discrimination, antagonism against generally a person or people on the basis of their race. So in racism, a kind of oppression or suppression or a kind of discrimination or prejudice or separation or hatredness will take place on the basis of race. This is related to a feeling that of superiority. Some people, some groups of people, they think that they are superior than others. So then they show this kind of discrimination, racism against the other groups which do not belong to the first group. So when a person is showing racism against another person or another group, naturally the person who feels the superiority of his race, naturally he tries to suppress or oppress the other group of people. So racism is nothing but showing kind of discrimination on the basis of race group. So if you understand the concept of racism, generally in the world racism is evident between the white and black people. So throughout history, if we observe the examples, the history has witnessed a racism between white and black people. So this racism, like a disease, like a cancer, it has been present in the society more or less. In recent examples also, if we take American example, the Floyd's instance, the racism again, it has shown up in America. So the examples of racism here and there are uh, emerging out in different contexts. So if you understand racism, uh, the racism, it talks about the discrimination on color, equality on between among groups of people. If you understand the concept of racism, in which country or countries do you think racial discrimination existed, or still exist? You understand the concept of racism, which discriminates among people based on their race or color. Can you remember any country or countries that there very much even today racial discrimination exists? Can you remember? Just now I told you the example of Floyd's example in America, which shook the country, and many questions arose from that incident. And if you remember the example of South Africa, where apartheid is a very uh, important theme of concern, where Nelson Mandela years together fought against the racist uh, uh, supremacy oppression against black people. So we can observe, we can notice now and then in many countries, still there exists a kind of racial discrimination among groups, more or less. And fortunately, many countries have uh, eradicated this concept of racial discrimination. But still, in some countries, this kind of racial discrimination is very evident to observe. So this is our pre-reading activity. By going through this pre-reading activity, we can estimate, we can expect that our present poem, which is prescribed in our syllabus, is on discrimination, and it is related to racism and racial discrimination. So now we try to see this poem. So the next section of this poem after pre-reading activity is about the author, about the poet. So now we have to see the details about Langston Hughes. But before entering into about the poet, author, Langston Hughes uh, has some relation, and our present poem, As I Grew Older, is also related to a movement uh, that emerged in America in 1920s. The name of the movement is Harlem Renaissance, and also which resulted of creating George music or George poetry. So first we try to get some basic information about this Harlem Renaissance. After that, we try to know details about the poet Langston Hughes. So George and Harlem Renaissance, these two things are interrelated. George music is there and George poetry is also there. And these two kind of art forms, George music and George poetry, emerged out of Harlem Renaissance. What does it mean, Harlem Renaissance? Renaissance is nothing but remembering or bringing into light of the forgotten or the neglected values. And this Renaissance began in a district named Harlem, the United States of America. So that this movement is known as Harlem Renaissance. Basically, Harlem Renaissance is related to black people. We know that American in American context, there are two major races we can observe there. One is the dominant white race, which migrated largely during 17th century to 19th century to America, United States of America, in search of new life, new fortunes from Europe. And the second type of race, major race in America, is the blacks, who were forcefully taken from their homeland, Africa, to work as slaves in the farms in the lands of the white people. So in American history, the white people remained as the masters and the black people remained as the slaves. So by observing this inhuman attitude and these inhuman conditions, the differences between these two races, many great intellectuals in America, including them Abraham Lincoln, after becoming the president of America, Abraham Lincoln abolished the slavery system in America, giving equal rights to the black people. So that led to civil war, and after that, the soldiers, the army of Abraham Lincoln won that civil war, and the blacks were given equality. But the discrimination on the name of race continued even after that. So in this backdrop, in this scenario, the black people in the district of Harlem, Manhattan, New York State, they started this movement, Harlem Renaissance, to bring the dignity to the black race. And this Harlem Renaissance, throughout its journey, it gave a rebirth to American arts, especially related to black artists. So Harlem Renaissance gave once again birth to American arts, which were totally ignored, which were totally neglected. No focus was given to those art forms. So this Harlem Renaissance again tried to bring out these art forms. And basically, this movement, Harlem Renaissance, was an intellectual movement, means it was began by well-educated people. Uh, Especially many of them were from they were blacks. But even the democratic white people also supported this movement, and they also became part of this movement. So basically, it was began by intellectual people, and extending to extension to this movement, it has emerged as a social movement. The black people started posing questions, asking for their equal rights, and they try to get their equal rights in the society, and also to represent their ideas, their views, to present their ideas, views. A great kind of artistic explosion has taken place in Harlem Renaissance. Artistic explosion means the artists started contributing their ideas, their views, and their presentations emerged like an explosion. So the writers, the painters, the musicians, many people started contributing to Harlem Renaissance. And Harlem Renaissance gave birth to jazz music, which was largely contributed by the black people. And the subject, the theme of the Renaissance, Harlem Renaissance art is uh, asking for equal rights, questioning the oppression, questioning the supremacy. And this jazz music or jazz poetry, syncopated rhythms and repetitive phrases. In this music, there we can observe syncopated rhythm, means they questioned the systematic order of rhythm in the music. So they try to abolish the order. So they used, they showed a kind of disorder in the rhythm to register their resistance, their non-acceptance towards established values. And they also used repetitive phrases, means the phrases in the poetry, in the writings, they appear again and again, repetitive, to blues and jazz music into their writing. So these Harlem Renaissance artists, writers used jazz music in their writings. And many Harlem Renaissance writers were deeply concerned with racial pride. If we see this movement, if we observe the movement, Harlem Renaissance, many of Harlem Renaissance writers were, were very much concerned of their racial pride. So they felt proud of their race. So they wanted to express themselves as equal as to their oppressed masters. So these are the things that we can associate with Harlem Renaissance. And our present poet Langston Hughes is also related to Harlem Renaissance. So in this scenario, in this backdrop, we have to understand Langston Hughes. So in this section, we try to understand, we try to know information related to the poet Langston Hughes. If we take the poet of this poem, As I Grew Older, this poem was written by Langston Hughes, an African American familiar famous poet. Langston Hughes was born in 1902 and was died in 1967. He lived for a span of 65 years. And Langston Hughes is considered as a leading writer and thinker of the Harlem Renaissance. In our previous slides, we saw what is Harlem Renaissance. So this Harlem Renaissance was a movement began in 1920s in America, asking for the equal rights and evoking the art and cultural form of black people who were supposed to be the oppressed race in America. And this movement uh, they gave birth to many writers, many musicians, many great people, intellectual. Among them, Langston Hughes was also one. And he was considered as one of the leading writer and thinker who contributed to the ideology of Harlem Renaissance. And this movement is an African American artistic movement, means these people are very much Americans with African roots because their forefathers were brought forcefully to America as slaves. So this artistic movement, basically, this is an artistic movement contributed by many artists of the 1920s that celebrated African American life and culture. So this movement basically focused, they celebrated, they wrote majorly on the life and culture. So they presented the life and also they presented the culture, the forgotten culture, the neglected values of African and American. So they presented the life of African and American, Afro-Americans, and they also presented the culture. They touched the culture of Afro-Americans. And coming to his personal life, if we see his life, Langston Hughes started writing at a young age. So as a very young man, he started writing his writings, Langston Hughes. And in the year 1926, Langston Hughes published his poetry of collections. So he published a collection of his poems in the year 1926, means he was born in 1902 and he published in 1926, means at the age of 24 years only, Langston Hughes published his first poetry of collection, the title The Weary Blues. So this collection of poetry gave a, gave popularity to Langston Hughes, and then the next year he published one more poetry, one more collection of his poems with the title "Find Clothes to the Jews" in 1927. So these two collection of poems established Langston Hughes as one of the familiar famous poets emerged from Harlem Renaissance. And Langston Hughes also was an early inventor of George poetry. So by taking inspiration from George music, Langston Hughes did some experiments in his poetry, which is later as established as George poetry, uh, contributed by many black poets. So we can call Langston Hughes one of the early inventors, and he was the early inventor of George poetry in writing poetry. And in all his writings, Hughes, in all his publications, in all his writings, Langston Hughes, he strongly condemned, he criticized, he ultimately rejected racism, means the discrimination on the name of color, the name of race. He totally rejected. And at the same time, not only rejecting racism, he promoted, he encouraged, he appreciated, he contributed for equality. So irrespective of races, he struggled, he fought, he wrote for equality among the races. So in this way, Langston Hughes was a strong supporter for equality among the races, among the people, and he was a great critic, and he strongly condemned racism present in any form. And if we look at his life, his culture, and his writings, Langston Hughes is celebrated, he is well known as an African American writer. And in his writings, we can observe the presence, the sincere presence of Afro American life, African American life, and we can see their culture. So, this oppressed, this suppressed people's culture, and also he presented spirituality. So these people's spirituality is presented, his poetry and his novels. He was also a novelist in his novels, and his plays. He also wrote dramas, plays, and even in his essays, in his articles, essays also, Langston Hughes tried to present the Afro-American, African American life and culture. So in all kinds of his writings, we can observe that Langston Hughes tried totally to celebrate, to present African American life in all kinds of his writings. And coming to our present poem, it is titled As I Grew Older. This poem was first published in 1925 as a separate poem, and later Langston Hughes included this poem in his first collection of poems, The Weary Blues, which was published in 1926 and which gave a good reputation to Langston Hughes as a young Harlem Renaissance poet at the age of 24. And our present poem, As I Grew Older, became part of this collection of poems. And this book, The Weary Blues, was first published in the year 1926. So first the poem As I Grew Older appeared as a separate independent poem, was published as an independent poem in the year 1925, but later it was made a part of the collection of poetry titled The Weary Blues, which was published in the year 1926. After the section of the poet in which we saw relevant details regarding to the poet of the poem, Langston Hughes. The next poem that is section in the poem that is given is about the poem. So what is this poem about? What are the main themes, ideas that were presented by the poet? We will see in this section. So this poem, as I grew older, talks about uh, the dreams. Usually, we will all have our dreams in our life. So this poem also talks about dreams that we will have in our life and the hardships one has to endure. So when we have the dreams, when we want to make the dreams, convert the dreams into reality, we want to make them real, then there will be hardships because never the dreams come very easily to us and before to us. They never reach us very easily. So to reach our dreams, to convert them into reality, to make them real, there will be hardships one has to endure. So we have to bear the hardships. You have the capacity to endure the hardships, the difficulties, the, the problems that come on the way of our journey. If we are ready to face those hardships, then our dreams may convert into reality. And also, not only we should face the hardships in our life to make our dreams true, real, we shall also have a strong will because till we reach the dream, till we make the dream into reality, to make it into true, we should work with a great will. Willpower should be there. If we lose that willpower, we cannot reach our dreams. So to reach our dreams, we should have that willpower one needs to have in order to achieve. So one should, every person is supposed to have the willpower and has to have the courage to face the hardships, to make our dreams real, true, to achieve goals, to achieve our goals, to reach our goals, our aims, and realize dreams. This is British spelling, so that the system is showing as mistaken, but the spelling is right in British English. Goals and realize dreams. To realize our dreams, to reach our goals, we should have the willpower. So that is the poem presents to us that everyone may have the dreams, but to reach the dreams, we should have the courage to face the hardships. And the second thing is that we should have the willpower to reach our goals. And in the next part of the poem also tells us that these dreams, so this poem talks about dreams, and these dreams do provide a source of inspiration. So in our struggle, in our effort, in our journey, the dreams which we have, they work as a source of inspiration. They give us the inspiration to work on them, to build to build on them. So dreams always they provide a kind of inspiration to us in achieving our dreams. And we also put efforts to transform dreams into reality. And suddenly, without an effort, without doing anything, our dreams never transform, change, convert into reality. To convert them into reality, to make them real ones, we have need to go through a lot of hardships. We have to put a lot of effort to transform dreams into reality. So that we have to understand, that we have to realize. And if we are ready to face any consequence in achieving our dreams into true, then only we can make our dreams into true. Otherwise, it cannot be happen. So uh, to explain this concept, this idea, the poet Langston Hughes uses a symbol in the poem. The symbol is, he uses the symbol of a wall, and this symbol is an evocative symbol. Evocative means that touches our feelings. That is very strong image he presents, and that is a wall. So how the wall is presented in the poem, we can understand this poem, the symbol wall. So by presenting the symbol of wall, Langston Hughes talks about the obstacles in realizing dreams. So this wall stands as an obstacle, as an hurdle in realizing the dreams. So in realizing the dream and in making the dream into a true one, there we will face a lot of hardships, then we will face a lot of obstacles and hurdles. So how to overcome them is presented in the poem. And uh, this this symbol is presented uh, by the poet because it seems difficult because of the discrimination he faces as an African American person. Langston Hughes himself, he was an African American person, means having African roots, though American citizen, he had African roots. And because he was an African American person, he faced a lot of discrimination on the name of racism. So he was the direct victim of the evil of racism. So it seemed, since he experienced it in his personal, he observed it in his personal life, he experienced that racism, that discrimination. Uh, so he thought it was difficult to overcome this discrimination. So he faces as he faces as an African American person, he uh, uh, presents how difficult it is to face this kind of obstacle. And now, before entering into the poem, we try to understand the title of the poem, As I Grew Older. So it has some 3-4 words, very easy to understand, to know the meanings of these words. But first we try to understand the title before beginning the poem. So in this poem, the title of the poem tells us, As I Grew Older. So in this poem, there is I. I means the speaker. There is a speaker in the poem. In first person singular, he is speaking. So who is he? He is the poet himself very much. And in the title, the poet says, Langston Hughes says that I grew older. I grew from generally every living thing grows from one stage to another stage. So from a boy to teenager, teenager to young man to middle-aged man, like this. So in this way, Langston Hughes presents that I grew older. And when I am growing a little bit older, as I grew older, so as I am becoming uh, uh, day by day, my age is increasing, I'm getting older. What I observe is the theme, the concept of the poem. So this is the title of the poem, As I Grew Older. So day by day, as I am growing to a old to aged person, so what I felt. So that is the theme of the So in this way, in the poem, Langston Hughes tries to touch the concept of racism that he observed in his real life experience. So with this, these sections, here I conclude my presentation on the poem As I Grew Older, written by African American poet who was a product of Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes. So in the next part of our presentation, we take the poem, we try to study it in detail, and after that, we take the sections that are presented following the poem that are presented in our syllabus. So by closing this poem here, I thank everyone for listening the presentation, and we will continue the poem in our next presentation. Thank you.